The sound of the earth cracking was like thunder, but beneath her feet. Fiona Collins had just enough time to glance upward at the wooden supports groaning before the mine shaft collapsed around her, plunging her world into darkness and dust. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. She'd only come to inspect her father's investment in the Silver Peak mine outside Val Verde, Texas, to ensure the operation was legitimate before he sent more money west. Now, as the last echo of falling rock settled around her, Fiona wondered if her father would ever know what had become of his only daughter. The year was 1878, and Val Verde was still raw territory, a place where fortunes were made and lost daily in the harsh Texas landscape. At 22, Fiona had insisted on making the journey from Boston against her father's wishes, determined to prove herself capable of handling business matters just as well as any son might have done. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had reluctantly raised her with a mind for figures and investments, never expecting she'd use that knowledge to venture into the untamed West. "Hello," Fiona called out, her voice sounding small in the confined space. The lantern she'd been carrying had smashed in the collapse, leaving her in near complete darkness save for a faint light filtering through some distant crack in the rubble. The air was thick with dust, making each breath a struggle. She coughed, feeling a sharp pain in her ribs. "Is anyone there?" "Please, help?" Only silence answered her. The foreman, Mr. Higgins, had led her partway into the mine before being called away to deal with some problem at the main entrance. He'd promised to return in minutes, leaving her with a miner named Charlie to continue the tour. But Charlie had wandered off just before the collapse, claiming he needed to check something in a nearby tunnel. Fiona's hands trembled as she felt the walls around her. The space was small, perhaps 10 feet wide, with the ceiling now dangerously low. Rocks and splintered timbers had sealed the way back to the entrance. She tried to remain calm, to think logically as her father had taught her. Panicking would only waste precious air. "They'll come looking," she whispered to herself, trying to believe it. They must have heard the collapse. "They'll come." Up above, the alarm bell at the Silver Peak mine rang frantically, its urgent clanging drawing miners from their positions and townsfolk from Val Verde. Among them was Travis Young, who had been delivering supplies to the mining camp when the ground shook and men started shouting about a cave-in. At 27, Travis had earned a reputation as one of the most reliable cowhands in the territory. He'd spent the last 5 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, saving every penny toward buying his own ranch someday. Most men would have lost those savings to whiskey and cards, but Travis kept his eyes on the horizon, on the future he was building step by step. "What happened?" he asked, grabbing the arm of a dust-covered miner who was running toward the main shaft. "East tunnel collapsed," the man shouted. "We've got men trapped, including some fancy lady from back east who was touring the operation." Travis's heart sank. He'd seen mine collapses before. They rarely ended with good news. Without thinking further, he tied his horse to a hitching post and ran toward the commotion. Men were gathering around the mine entrance, some grabbing tools, others arguing about the best approach. "The supporting timbers in the east section have been showing signs of stress for days," one older miner was saying. Higgins knew it, but he didn't want to halt production with that investor's daughter coming to inspect. "How many are trapped?" Travis asked. "At least 3 men that we know of," replied the miner. "And that woman Collins, I think her name is. Higgins made it out just before it went. He's over there." Travis spotted the foreman, a stocky man with a bushy mustache who was issuing orders with the panic of someone who knew he'd made a fatal mistake. Travis approached him. "Where exactly was she when it happened?" Higgins looked at Travis with bloodshot eyes. About 200 yards in, at the fork where the new silver vein starts. Why do you care, Cowboy? This isn't your business. It became my business when someone got trapped, Travis replied, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him at the man's negligence. I've done rescue work before, after the collapse at the Blue River mine last year. Higgins seemed to reassess Travis, noting his broad shoulders and steady gaze. Fine. They're organizing a team now, but it'll take hours to shore up the entrance enough to get in safely. Hours she might not have, Travis muttered, already moving toward the group of men preparing equipment. Inside the collapsed section, Fiona was trying to stay conscious. The dust had settled somewhat, but breathing remained difficult. She'd torn a strip from her petticoat to cover her mouth and nose, but the air was growing staler by the minute. Her fashionable traveling outfit, a practical but still stylish burgundy skirt and jacket over a white blouse, was now gray with dust and torn in places. She'd already tried shouting several times but had stopped to conserve energy. Instead, she focused on examining her prison. The space was smaller than she'd initially thought, perhaps 15 feet long and 10 wide, with one end completely blocked by fallen rock and timber. The other direction seemed to lead deeper into the mine, but was partially obstructed by debris. Using her hands, Fiona carefully explored the blockage toward what she believed was the mine entrance. The rocks shifted slightly under her touch, sending a shower of pebbles and dust down on her head. She backed away quickly, realizing that disturbing the pile might bring down more of the unstable ceiling. "Don't be a fool, Fiona," she whispered to herself. "You'll only make it worse." Instead, she sat with her back against the least precarious-looking wall and tried to think clearly. Her father had always praised her level head, even when he worried about her independence. "You've got your mother's spirit and your father's mind," he often said. "A dangerous combination." A faint sound made her freeze. Was that voices, or just the settling of the mine? "Hello." She called out, louder this time. "I'm here. Can anyone hear me?" Outside, the rescue effort was taking shape, but not fast enough for Travis. The mine engineers were insisting on bringing in additional supports before anyone entered the damaged shaft, a process that would take at least 2 hours. "Those people might be running out of air while we stand around talking," Travis argued, watching as men unloaded timber from wagons with what seemed to him like agonizing slowness. "And if we rush in without proper supports, we'll have twice as many dead," countered the lead engineer, a man named Wilson. "I understand your concern, young, but we do this by the book or not at all." Travis walked away in frustration, circling the mine entrance and studying the hillside. The Silver Peak mine tunneled into the base of a rocky rise, with various ventilation shafts and secondary entrances dotting the slope. One of these smaller openings caught his attention, a narrow shaft about 50 yards east of the main entrance, partially hidden by scrub brush. Without announcing his intentions, Travis grabbed a lantern and rope from the supply pile and made his way to the secondary entrance. It was barely wide enough for a man to pass through, clearly not a main thoroughfare, but perhaps a ventilation shaft or emergency exit. A wooden grate covered it, but the lock was rusted and gave way after a few solid kicks. "Young, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Wilson shouted, noticing Travis's departure. "Finding another way in," Travis called back, already lighting the lantern. "You focus on the main entrance." "I'm not waiting." "You'll get yourself killed," Wilson warned, but made no move to physically stop him. Travis paused just long enough to say, "Maybe, but I'm not leaving those people down there to suffocate while we debate the safest approach." With that, he ducked into the narrow tunnel, the lantern held before him. The shaft was tight, forcing him to hunch over as he moved forward. The air was musty but flowed past him, a good sign that ventilation still functioned in at least parts of the mine. He'd been in enough mines to understand the basics of their layout. This secondary passage would likely connect to the main tunnels eventually. Travis moved carefully but quickly, marking his path with chalk he'd grabbed from the supply table. The tunnel gradually widened until he was able to stand upright, and soon he found himself in what appeared to be an older section of the mine. According to the shouted descriptions he'd heard, the collapse had occurred in the eastern tunnel, which should be accessible if he continued straight and then turned north at the first major junction. The sound of shifting rock somewhere ahead made him pause. Then he heard a faint voice calling out, a woman's voice. "Hello, is someone there?" Travis's heart leaped. "I hear you," he shouted back. "Keep talking, I'm coming to get you." In her dark prison, Fiona couldn't believe her ears. Someone had heard her, someone was coming. She pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob of relief, then gathered herself. "I'm here," she called out, her voice stronger now. "The tunnel collapsed around me. I think I'm in the eastern passage." Travis followed her voice, moving as quickly as caution allowed. The passage showed signs of stress, cracks in the walls, support beams bending under pressure. He passed a junction where the tunnel branched north and south, choosing the northern path toward the voice. After about 50 yards, he came upon the collapse. It was worse than he'd feared. The tunnel ahead was completely blocked with fallen rock and shattered timber, but the voice was clearer now, coming from just beyond the obstruction. "Are you there?" Fiona called out, hearing the approaching footsteps halt. "Yes, madam," Travis answered, examining the blockage with his lantern. "My name's Travis Young. I'm going to get you out of there." "Fiona Collins," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank God you're here. Is there a rescue party with you?" Travis hesitated before answering truthfully. "Not exactly. They're working on shoring up the main entrance, but that's going to take time. I found another way in." "You came alone?" Fiona asked, sounding both impressed and concerned. "Seemed like the sensible thing to do," Travis replied, setting down his lantern and assessing the pile of rubble. It looked unstable, but he could see small gaps between some of the rocks. "Are you injured, Miss Collins?" "Some bruises, and I might have cracked a rib, but nothing serious," Fiona answered. "There were others in this section, though minors. I haven't heard anything from them since the collapse." Travis nodded grimly, though she couldn't see him. The miners had likely been in the section that took the full force of the cave-in. "I'll look for them after I get you out," he promised, though he doubted he'd find them alive. He began carefully removing smaller rocks from the pile, creating a space near the top of the blockage where the tunnel ceiling remained somewhat intact. It was painstaking work, with each stone potentially triggering another collapse. His hands were soon scraped and bleeding, but he continued without pause. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Collins," Travis called through the diminishing barrier. "What brings a lady from back east to a place like Val Verde?" Fiona appreciated his attempt to keep her calm and distracted. "My father invested in this mine. I came to assess whether it was worth putting more money into. He doesn't know I'm here, actually. He thinks I'm visiting an aunt in St. Louis." Travis couldn't help but smile at that as he pulled away a larger rock, creating an opening about a foot wide near the top of the pile. "I imagine he'd be none too pleased to hear about your current situation." "That's putting it mildly," Fiona admitted, moving toward the sound of his voice. She could now see a faint glow from his lantern through the opening. "He always said my independence would be the death of me." "Not today it won't," Travis grunted, widening the hole further. Sweat dripped from his brow despite the cool air of the mine. "I can see you now, Miss Collins." Fiona looked up and for the first time saw her rescuer, or at least his face, illuminated by the lantern light. Strong features, a square jaw darkened by stubble, and eyes that somehow managed to look kind even in this dire situation. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair damp with exertion. "Can you climb up to this opening if I clear it a bit more?" Travis asked. Fiona assessed the distance. The hole was about 6 feet up from where she stood. "I think so, if I can find something to stand on." She looked around and spotted a broken section of support beam. Dragging it beneath the opening, she positioned it to give herself extra height. Meanwhile, Travis continued to widen the hole, his hands now visibly raw and bleeding. "Your hands," Fiona said with concern. "They'll heal," Travis replied simply. "Now let's get you out of there." The opening was now about 2 feet wide, barely enough for a person to squeeze through. Travis lay flat on his stomach at the edge of the rubble pile, reaching down with both arms. "You'll need to be careful," he warned. This whole pile could shift at any moment. Fiona climbed onto the wooden beam, which wobbled precariously beneath her weight. She reached up, grasping Travis's outstretched hands. His grip was strong and sure despite his injured palms. "On 3, Travis said. 1, 2, 3. He pulled as Fiona pushed off from the beam. For a terrifying moment, she was suspended between the two spaces, the rocks around the opening shifting ominously. Then Travis gave one final, powerful heave, and she was through, collapsing on top of him as they both rolled away from the unstable rubble pile. A cascade of stones and dust followed them, partially closing the opening again. Travis instinctively shielded Fiona with his body until the debris settled. When the dust cleared, they found themselves in an awkward embrace, faces inches apart in the lantern light. Travis quickly helped her to her feet, both of them coughing from the fresh dust. "Thank you," Fiona said, finally able to see her rescuer properly. He was tall, with the lean, muscular build of a man who worked outdoors for a living. His clothes, jeans, a simple blue shirt, and a dust-covered leather vest marked him as a cowhand rather than a miner. "We're not out of this mine yet," Travis cautioned, picking up the lantern. "Can you walk? The way I came in is narrow but clear." Fiona nodded, brushing ineffectually at the dust covering her once fine clothes. "I can walk. What about the other miners?" Travis's expression grew somber. "I'll report their location when we get out. But from what I can see, that section took the worst of the collapse." He didn't need to elaborate further. Fiona closed her eyes briefly, a prayer for the men she'd barely known passing through her mind. Then she straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Lead the way, Mr. Young." They began making their way through the tunnel, Travis slightly ahead with the lantern, Fiona following closely behind. The mine groaned around them, the remaining supports creaking under pressure. "How did you come to be in Val Verde?" Fiona asked as they walked, partly to distract herself from the frightening sounds and partly out of genuine curiosity about this man who'd risked his life to save a stranger. "I work cattle mostly," Travis replied. "Was delivering supplies to the mine when the collapse happened. Seemed like the right thing to do, coming to help." "The right thing," Fiona repeated quietly. "Most men would have waited for the engineers to declare it safe." Travis glanced back at her with a half-smile. "I've never been accused of excessive patience, Miss Collins. Besides, waiting doesn't always lead to the best outcomes." They reached a junction in the tunnels, and Travis paused to consult his chalk marks. "This way," he said, pointing to the left passage. "It's not far to the secondary entrance I used." As they turned into the passage, a deep rumble shook the mine, more powerful than before. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. "Run!" Travis shouted, grabbing Fiona's hand and pulling her forward as the tunnel behind them began to collapse. They raced through the narrow passage, the sound of falling rock pursuing them like some vengeful beast. The secondary entrance appeared ahead, a small circle of daylight that had never looked more beautiful. Travis pushed Fiona ahead of him. "Go," he urged as the tunnel continued to disintegrate behind them. Fiona scrambled through the opening into the blinding Texas sunlight, Travis right behind her. They collapsed onto the scrubby ground outside, gasping for air as a cloud of dust billowed from the mine entrance. The secondary shaft sealed itself with a final groan and shower of rocks. For a moment they lay still, simply breathing the fresh air. Then Travis sat up, examining Fiona with concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Fiona took stock of herself. Her ribs ached, her hands and knees were scraped, and every muscle in her body seemed to be screaming in protest, but she was alive. "Nothing serious," she assured him. "Thanks to you." She looked at his hands, raw and bleeding from digging through the rubble. Without thinking, she took them in her own, turning them palms up to assess the damage. Travis winced but didn't pull away. "These need tending," she said softly. "After we let them know we're out," Travis replied, nodding toward the main entrance where a crowd had gathered, apparently alerted by the sound of the secondary collapse. They made their way around the hillside, supporting each other. When they appeared, dust-covered but walking, a cheer went up from the assembled miners and townsfolk. Mr. Higgins pushed through the crowd, his face ashen. "Miss Collins, thank God. We were preparing to—" He stopped short when he saw Travis. "Young, how did you— We thought you were buried when that second collapse hit." "Found another way," Travis said simply, not bothering to explain his unauthorized rescue mission. "Miss Collins needs medical attention, and there are still men trapped in there." Higgins nodded frantically. "Doctors already here for when we found survivors, and we've got crews working on the main entrance." He hesitated before adding, "I don't suppose you saw any sign of Charlie, Peterson, or Martinez in there." Fiona exchanged a glance with Travis before answering quietly, "That section was completely collapsed, Mr. Higgins. I'm so sorry." The news spread quickly through the gathered crowd. Hats were removed, heads bowed. 3 more lives claimed by the dangerous work of mining. It was a familiar tragedy in the West, but no less painful for its commonality. A gray-haired man with a leather medical bag approached them. "I'm Dr. Montgomery," he introduced himself. "Let's get you both looked at." They were led to a tent that had been set up near the mine entrance as a medical station. Dr. Montgomery examined Fiona first, confirming that she had indeed cracked 2 ribs but suffered no other serious injuries. He wrapped her torso tightly with bandages and gave her something for the pain. "You're lucky, young lady," he said as he worked. "Most people trapped in mine collapses don't walk away at all, let alone with just some cracked ribs." "It wasn't luck," Fiona replied, her eyes finding Travis, who sat waiting his turn. "It was him." The doctor followed her gaze and nodded. "So I heard. Quite the reckless rescue, young. Could have gotten yourself killed." Travis shrugged. "Seemed worth the risk." Next, the doctor cleaned and bandaged Travis's hands, clucking disapprovingly at the deep lacerations across his palms and fingers. "You dug through solid rock with your bare hands?" Dr. Montgomery asked incredulously. "Wasn't solid," Travis replied, "and I didn't have much choice. Once they were both tended to, they were offered lodging in Val Verde." Fiona's accommodations at the town's one decent hotel had been arranged as part of her inspection visit, but Travis initially declined any assistance. "I've got my bedroll," he said. "I'll be fine camping outside town." Mr. Higgins, still shaken by the disaster and clearly feeling responsible, intervened. "Nonsense. The mine company will put you up at Mrs. Thornton's boarding house for as long as you need, young. It's the least we can do." Travis looked like he might argue, but a glance at his bandaged hands seemed to remind him of his limitations. I suppose just for tonight, he conceded. Fiona found herself oddly relieved that he would be staying in town. Perhaps you'll join me for dinner this evening, Mr. Young. I owe you a debt I can never repay, but I can at least offer a meal. Travis seemed taken aback by the invitation but nodded. I'd be honored, Miss Collins. They parted ways to clean up and rest, agreeing to meet at the hotel's small dining room at 7. As Fiona soaked in a copper tub in her room, washing away the mine dust and trying to ignore the pain in her ribs, she found her thoughts returning repeatedly to Travis Young. There was something about him, a directness, an unpretentious courage that she found herself admiring. Men in Boston wore their accomplishments like fine coats, displayed for all to see. Travis had saved her life and seemed almost embarrassed by the gratitude it inspired. At precisely 7, Travis arrived at the hotel dining room. Fiona almost didn't recognize him. Gone were the dust-covered work clothes, replaced by a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be his best pair of jeans. His dark hair was damp and neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. Only his bandaged hands and a small cut above his right eyebrow remained as evidence of the day's events. Fiona had done her best with her own appearance, though her options were limited. Her traveling clothes had been ruined in the mine, but she'd packed a simple blue dress that had survived in her hotel room. She'd arranged her auburn hair as neatly as possible without her lady's maid, who remained in Boston unaware of her mistress's adventure. Miss Collins, Travis greeted her, removing his hat. You look remarkably well for someone who was trapped in a mine this morning. As do you, Mr. Young, she replied with a smile, though I think we've shared enough of an ordeal that you might call me Fiona. Travis seemed to consider this breach of formality before nodding. Then I'm Travis to you. They were seated at the best table in the modest dining room, the hotel proprietor having heard of the day's events and apparently deciding that the heroes deserved special treatment. The menu was limited but represented the finest offerings available in Val Verde steak, potatoes, and fresh bread, with apple pie for dessert. As they awaited their meal, Fiona studied Travis with undisguised curiosity. You mentioned you work with cattle. Are you employed by one of the local ranches? Travis shook his head. I drive herds up to Kansas mainly for whoever's hiring. Been doing it for 5 years now. He hesitated, then added, I'm saving to buy my own place someday. Small ranch, nothing fancy. That's admirable, Fiona said sincerely, to have a clear goal and work toward it. And what about you? Travis asked. What does a Boston lady really want with a silver mine in Texas? Fiona smiled at his directness. I told you the truth earlier. My father invested in the mine and I came to assess its value. He's made poor investments before, trusting the wrong people. I have a head for numbers and wanted to see for myself. Without his knowledge, Travis reminded her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Yes, well, Fiona sighed. My father believes a woman's place is in the home, despite giving me an education that prepared me for more. He indulged my interest in his business affairs as a hobby, never thinking I'd actually act on what I learned. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. Travis struggled slightly with his utensils, his bandaged hands making the task difficult. Without comment, Fiona reached over and cut his steak into manageable pieces. He looked embarrassed but nodded his thanks. Will you tell him about the mine? Travis asked after they'd eaten in silence for a few moments. I must, Fiona replied, though I'll likely omit certain details about my personal involvement in today's events. What he doesn't know won't give him apoplexy. She paused, then added more seriously. The mine isn't a good investment anyway. Even before the collapse, I saw signs of poor management and declining yields. Travis nodded thoughtfully. Higgins isn't a bad man, but he cuts corners. Everyone in town knows it. Lives were lost because of those cut corners, Fiona said quietly. That's the reality of mining, Travis replied, though his tone suggested he didn't find it acceptable either. Men risk their lives and owners back east collect the profits. Not all owners, Fiona countered. My father cares about the welfare of those who work for him. It's why I came to ensure his investment wasn't supporting dangerous practices. Travis studied her for a moment, then nodded. I believe you. You don't strike me as someone who'd turn a blind eye to suffering. The conversation turned to lighter topics as they ate. Fiona asked about Travis's experiences driving cattle, and he shared stories of stampedes and river crossings that made her realize how sheltered her life in Boston had been. In turn, she told him about her education and her secret passion for mathematics and business, subjects considered inappropriate for young ladies. My mother died when I was 8, she explained. My father, having no son, taught me what he would have taught a boy. I think he always meant it as a theoretical education, something to make me an interesting conversationalist in society. He never expected me to actually use what I learned. His mistake, Travis said with a smile. You strike me as someone who uses every tool at her disposal. As they finished their apple pie, Fiona found herself reluctant for the evening to end. Travis was unlike any man she'd met in Boston, straightforward, unpretentious, and seemingly unbothered by her unfeminine interests. How long will you remain in Val Verde? Travis asked as they lingered over coffee. I had planned to stay 3 days, but given today's events, I should probably depart sooner, Fiona replied. There's a stagecoach to San Antonio tomorrow afternoon where I can catch a train eastward. Travis nodded, a flicker of something like disappointment crossing his features. Probably wise. Val Verde isn't exactly equipped for a lady of your standing. And you, Fiona asked, will you return to your cattle driving? I'm between jobs at the moment, Travis admitted. Was delivering those supplies as a favor to a friend. I'll likely head north in a few days, see if any of the ranches need hands for a drive. They fell into silence, both aware that their brief acquaintance was drawing to a close. Finally, Travis cleared his throat. I should let you rest. You've had quite a day, and if you're traveling tomorrow. Fiona nodded, though she felt an unexpected reluctance to bid him good night. Yes, of course. Thank you for joining me, Travis. He stood, placing his hat back on his head. Thank you for the meal. It was pleasant. Pleasant seemed an inadequate word for the connection Fiona felt had formed between them, but she smiled and nodded. Good night, then. Travis hesitated, then added, if you'd allow it, I'd like to see you off tomorrow. Make sure you're safely on your way. I'd like that, Fiona replied, perhaps too quickly. The stage leaves at 2 from outside the general store. Travis nodded, touched the brim of his hat, and departed. Fiona remained at the table for a few moments, contemplating the strange day, and the even stranger effect this cowboy was having on her normally practical mind. Morning brought clear skies and the full ache of Fiona's injuries. Moving was painful, but she managed to pack her few belongings and settle her bill at the hotel. Before the stagecoach's departure, she visited the mine office to speak with Mr. Higgins. The company extends its deepest apologies for your ordeal, Miss Collins, Higgins began as soon as she entered. Fiona raised a hand to stop him. My concern is for the families of the men who died, Mr. Higgins. What provisions are being made for them? Higgins looked uncomfortable. Standard compensation, of course. A month's wages to the widows. A month's wages for a lifetime lost, Fiona said sharply. That's hardly adequate. I'll be recommending to my father that any continued investment be contingent on establishing a proper fund for the families of lost miners, as well as significant improvements to safety procedures. Higgins paled at the implication that he might lose his Eastern investors. Of course, Miss Collins. We value safety above all else. Yesterday's incident was an anomaly, I assure you. Fiona gave him a skeptical look but said nothing more on the subject. Instead, she inquired, "Has there been any news of Travis Young this morning? I expected to see him around town." "Young. He rode out early to the Martinez place," Higgins replied. "Poor Martinez left a wife and 3 young children. Young apparently took it upon himself to help with some repairs to their roof before the widow decides what to do next." Something warm unfurled in Fiona's chest at this news. Of course Travis would be helping those in need rather than resting after his ordeal. It only confirmed what she already sensed about his character. "I see," she said. "If you see him, please tell him I was asking after him." Fiona left the office and spent the remaining hours before the stagecoach's departure writing a detailed letter to her father about the mine and its operations, careful to emphasize the business aspects rather than her personal adventure. She was just sealing the envelope when a knock came at her hotel room door. Opening it revealed Travis, looking somewhat disheveled and out of breath. "I thought I might miss you," he said. "Took longer at the Martinez place than I expected." "Mr. Higgins told me where you were," Fiona replied, unable to suppress a smile at seeing him. "It was kind of you to help them." Travis shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Seemed like the right thing to do. Are you ready to depart? I can carry your bag to the stage." "Thank you, yes," Fiona said, handing him her small traveling case. As they walked toward the general store where the stagecoach would depart, she found herself searching for something to say, some way to express the turmoil of emotions she was feeling. In just 24 hours, this man had saved her life and somehow worked his way into her thoughts in a most persistent manner. A small crowd had gathered to see the stagecoach off, a typical occurrence in a town where diversions were limited. The coach itself was already waiting, the driver loading mail bags and parcels onto the roof. Travis handed Fiona's bag to the driver, then turned to her with an awkward formality that hadn't been present the night before. "Well, Miss Collins, I wish you safe travels back to Boston," he said, his voice stiff. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Young," Fiona replied, matching his formality though it felt wrong somehow. They stood facing each other, neither moving toward the waiting stagecoach. Finally, Travis spoke again, his voice lower. "I'm not usually one for impulsive actions, yesterday notwithstanding, but I find myself wondering if you might consider writing to me once you're settled back home." Fiona felt a rush of warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "I'd like that very much. Where should I address my letters?" Travis reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Wrote down the general delivery address in Abilene. I check for mail whenever I pass through, which is every few months." Fiona took the paper, her fingers brushing his. Despite the bandages, she felt a jolt at the contact. "I'll write as soon as I return," she promised. "The Boston men must be blind," Travis said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise even him. "I beg your pardon?" Fiona asked, confused. Travis looked embarrassed but continued. "To let a woman like you travel across the country alone. If you were mine—" He stopped abruptly, realizing what he was saying. Fiona's heart raced at his unfinished thought. "If I were yours," she prompted softly. "If you were mine," Travis continued, his voice low and earnest, "I'd never want to let you out of my sight, but I'd also never clip your wings. A spirit like yours needs to soar." Before Fiona could respond to this unexpected declaration, the stagecoach driver called out, "All aboard who's coming aboard." "We leave in 2 minutes." The moment hung between them, charged with possibilities neither had anticipated when they'd met in the darkness of the collapsed mine. "I should go," Fiona said, not moving. "You should," Travis agreed, equally stationary. "Last call," the driver shouted. Fiona made a decision that would have shocked her Boston acquaintances and possibly given her father that apoplexy she'd mentioned. She stepped forward and placed a brief, gentle kiss on Travis's cheek. "Thank you for saving my life, Travis Young," she whispered. Then, with a rustle of skirts, she turned and hurried to the stagecoach. Travis stood rooted to the spot, his hand unconsciously rising to touch the place where her lips had been. He watched as the driver helped her into the coach, as she settled by the window, as her eyes found his again through the glass. The stagecoach pulled away in a cloud of dust, and Travis remained in the street long after it had disappeared from view, wondering if he'd just let something precious slip away. The journey back to Boston seemed interminable to Fiona. As the stagecoach bounced along the rough Texas roads, she had ample time to question her decision to leave. The rational part of her mind knew it was absurd to consider any alternative. She had responsibilities in Boston, a father who would worry, a life that had been carefully constructed and planned. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something vital had been left behind in Val Verde. She wrote her first letter to Travis on the train from San Antonio, pouring out her thoughts about their brief acquaintance and her hope that he would write back soon. She posted it at a stop in St. Louis, wondering how long it would be before he passed through Abilene to receive it. Back in Boston, Fiona slipped easily into her old routines, helping her father with his business correspondence in the mornings, making social calls in the afternoons, attending carefully selected cultural events in the evenings. Yet something had changed. The world that had once seemed sufficient now felt confining, like a dress that was a size too small. Her father noticed the difference in her, though she had indeed omitted the more dangerous aspects of her Texas journey when recounting it to him. "You seem distracted since your return, my dear," he commented one evening as they sat in their comfortable parlor. "Did something happen during your visit to your aunt that you haven't shared?" Fiona considered telling him the truth, but decided against it. He would only worry, and there was nothing to be gained by it now. "I simply found the West fascinating, Father. It's so different from Boston, rawer perhaps, but also more honest in some ways." Her father studied her thoughtfully. "I've had several inquiries about your availability for social engagements since your return. Mr. Whitcomb, in particular, seems quite interested in furthering your acquaintance." Fiona suppressed a sigh. Edward Whitcomb was exactly the sort of man her father hoped she would marry, from a good family, with a solid position in a respectable bank. Utterly predictable and utterly boring. "I'm not interested in Mr. Whitcomb, Father," she said gently. "Nor any of the other suitable young men you've introduced me to over the years." Her father frowned. "You're 22, Fiona. While I've indulged your interest in education and business matters, it's time you considered your future. A woman needs security. And if I want more than security?" Fiona asked. "What if I want adventure and passion as well?" Her father looked genuinely perplexed. "Those are fleeting things, my dear. A solid marriage to a respectable man is what will serve you best in the long run." Fiona didn't argue further, knowing it would only upset him. Instead, she excused herself to her room, where she pulled out the letter that had arrived that morning from Abilene, Texas. Travis's handwriting was rough but legible, his words straightforward yet somehow more meaningful than all the flowery prose she'd received from Boston suitors over the years. He wrote of his daily life, the cattle he worked with, the people he encountered, the small ranch he still dreamed of owning someday. He asked about her return journey and her life in Boston, expressing genuine interest rather than the polite inquiries society demanded. Most importantly, he wrote that he thought of her often, that the memory of her courage in the mine and her kindness afterward stayed with him through the long days on the trail. Fiona found herself replying immediately, her pen flying across the paper as she shared her frustrations with Boston society, her father's expectations, and her own growing sense that she'd returned to a life that no longer fit her. She hesitated before sending such an honest letter, wondering if it was proper to share such intimate thoughts with a man she barely knew. But something about Travis invited honesty, and she finally sealed the envelope with a sense of relief at having expressed her true feelings. Their correspondence continued over the next 3 months. Fiona lived for Travis's letters, which arrived irregularly as he passed through Abilene. She found herself sharing thoughts with him that she'd never voiced to anyone else, her desire for more independence, her secret dream of perhaps running her own small business someday, her frustration with the limited options available to women of her class. Travis, in turn, revealed his own hopes and fears. The ranch he dreamed of buying in the Texas Hill Country, where water was more plentiful than in the areas he usually worked. His concern that he was reaching an age where the hard life of a cowhand would begin to take a greater toll on his body. His admission, in one particularly candid letter, that he'd begun to imagine a future that included a partner rather than the solitary existence he'd always assumed would be his lot. As spring turned to summer in Boston, Fiona made a decision. Without consulting her father, she withdrew a significant portion of the inheritance she'd received from her mother upon turning 21, and purchased a train ticket to San Antonio. When she informed her father of her intentions, the argument that ensued was exactly as explosive as she'd anticipated. "This is madness, Fiona," her father shouted, his face flushed with anger and incomprehension. "You cannot simply travel to Texas alone to visit some cowhand you met once." "I'm not asking for your permission, father," Fiona replied calmly. "I'm 22 years old and in possession of my own funds. I'm merely informing you of my plans out of respect." "Respect?" he sputtered. "How is this respectful? You'll ruin your reputation. No decent man in Boston will marry you after such a scandal." "Perhaps I don't want to marry a decent man from Boston," Fiona said quietly. Her father stared at her in shocked silence before his expression softened to one of concern. "My dear, I understand that you found your trip exciting, that perhaps this young man seems romantic compared to the gentleman you know here. But you cannot build a life on such fleeting impressions. What do you really know about this Travis Young?" Fiona thought of Travis's letters, of the soul he'd revealed through his simple, honest words. "I know that he risked his life to save mine without hesitation. I know that he works hard for everything he has, with no sense of entitlement. I know that he listens to what I say and values my thoughts." She paused before adding, "I know that when I think of my future, his face is what I see." Her father sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 58 years. "You're in love with him," he said, not a question but a realization. "Yes," Fiona admitted the first time she'd said it aloud. "I believe I am." "And does he return these feelings?" Fiona hesitated. Travis had never explicitly declared his love in his letters, though his affection was clear. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "That's partly why I need to go. To discover if what we've built through our correspondence is real, if it can withstand proximity and time." Her father was silent for a long moment before asking, "And if it cannot? If you travel all that way to find he's not the man you've imagined him to be?" "Then I'll return to Boston, wiser for the experience," Fiona replied. But at least I'll know. I won't spend my life wondering what might have been. In the end, her father didn't give his blessing, but neither did he forbid her journey. The day before her departure, he came to her room as she was packing. "Your mother had the same determination," he said quietly. "It was what I loved most about her, though it often drove me to distraction." He handed her a small leather pouch. This was hers. "I think she would want you to have it now." Inside, Fiona found a beautiful gold locket containing a miniature portrait of her mother as a young woman. She looked up at her father with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I only want your happiness, Fiona," he said. "I hope you find it, whether in Texas or back here in Boston." The journey west felt entirely different this time. Where before Fiona had been filled with curiosity and a sense of adventure, now she experienced both anticipation and fear. What if Travis had changed his mind? What if the connection they'd felt existed only in her imagination? What if he'd met someone else in the months since they'd parted? She'd sent a telegram from Boston before departing, addressed to the General Delivery Office in Abilene. "Arriving San Antonio June 15, stop hope, to see you soon, stop Fiona." But she had no way of knowing if Travis had received it, or if he would be able to meet her. The uncertainty made the journey both excruciating and exhilarating. San Antonio was much larger than Val Verde, a proper city with multiple hotels and restaurants. Fiona checked into the Menger Hotel, considered the finest in the city, and sent another telegram to Abilene, confirming her arrival and her accommodation. Then she waited, alternating between pacing her room and sitting by the hotel's front windows, watching every approaching figure with a racing heart. 2 days passed with no sign of Travis. Fiona tried to remain hopeful, reminding herself that he might be far from Abilene, that it might take time for him to receive her messages and travel to San Antonio. On the third day, she was having lunch in the hotel's dining room when the maitre d' approached her table. "Miss Collins, there's a gentleman asking for you in the lobby. A Mr. Young." Fiona's heart leaped. She stood so quickly she nearly knocked over her water glass, then forced herself to take a deep breath and smooth her skirts. "Thank you. Please tell him I'll be right there." She checked her reflection in a decorative mirror on the dining room wall, tucking a stray strand of auburn hair back into place. Her blue dress, chosen specifically because Travis had once mentioned in a letter that he recalled her blue dress from their dinner in Val Verde, suddenly seemed inadequate. But there was no time to change now. Taking another steadying breath, Fiona walked into the lobby. And there he was, standing by the front desk, looking uncomfortable in the elegant surroundings. He wore clean-clothes jeans, a white shirt, and a black vest, but his hat was still marked by the dust of the trail and his boots had seen better days. To Fiona, he had never looked more handsome. Travis turned as she approached, and the expression that crossed his face, relief, joy, something akin to reverence, told her everything she needed to know. "You came," she said simply. "As soon as I got your telegram," Travis replied. "I was working a herd north of Abilene. Rode day and night to get here." They stood looking at each other, oblivious to the curious glances of the hotel staff and other guests. The lobby of the Menger Hotel had seen its share of unusual encounters, but the obviously well-bred Eastern lady and the rough-hewn cowboy made for a particularly intriguing tableau. "Would you like to sit somewhere more private?" Fiona suggested, gesturing toward the hotel's garden courtyard. Travis nodded, his eyes never leaving her face, as if he feared she might disappear if he looked away. They found a secluded bench beneath a flowering tree, far enough from other guests to speak freely. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me again," Travis admitted once they were seated. "Your letters were everything to me, but I kept thinking a lady like you must have better prospects back in Boston." "None that I cared about," Fiona replied honestly. "I couldn't stop thinking about you, about the connection I felt even in those brief hours we shared." She hesitated, then added, "I realize it might seem impulsive coming all this way. If you don't feel the same," Travis reached for her hand, stopping her words. "I feel the same," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've thought of little else since you left. But Fiona, my life is nothing like what you're accustomed to. I have no fortune, no fine house, nothing to offer that would match what you've known." Fiona turned her hand in his, their fingers intertwining. "What if those aren't the things I want anymore? What if what I want is a life with meaning, with work that matters, with someone who sees me for who I truly am?" Travis's eyes, as blue and open as the Texas sky, searched hers. "And you think that's me? That I'm the one you want that life with?" "I do," Fiona said simply. "If you'll have me." A slow smile spread across Travis's face, transforming it with a joy so pure it made Fiona's heart ache. "I've been saving for 5 years to buy a small ranch," he said. "It's not much yet, but with a bit more time I have money," Fiona interrupted. "My mother's inheritance. Enough to buy a good property and stock it properly." Travis's expression clouded slightly. "I can't take your money, Fiona. I need to provide for you myself." Fiona squeezed his hand. "It wouldn't be you taking my money, it would be us building something together. A partnership." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Unless you prefer a wife who doesn't involve herself in such matters." "A wife," Travis repeated, a wondering tone in his voice. Then he laughed, the sound bright and unburdened. "Fiona Collins, are you proposing to me?" Fiona felt her cheeks flush but met his gaze steadily. "I believe I am, Travis Young, though perhaps it's not entirely proper." "Propriety be damned," Travis said, and then he was kissing her, right there in the courtyard of San Antonio's finest hotel. His lips were warm and sure against hers, his hands gentle as they cradled her face. Fiona melted into the kiss, all her doubts vanishing in the certainty of this connection, this rightness. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Travis pressed his forehead to hers. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes to your proposal. Yes to a partnership. Yes to everything as long as it's with you." They were married 2 weeks later in San Antonio, with only a justice of the peace and 2 hastily recruited witnesses in attendance. Fiona wore a simple cream-colored dress purchased in San Antonio, and Travis wore the first suit he'd owned since his father's funeral 15 years earlier. They exchanged plain gold bands and promises to face whatever came together. Fiona sent a letter to her father immediately after the ceremony, explaining her decision and expressing her hope that he would come to accept it in time. She included a formal invitation for him to visit them once they were settled. With Fiona's inheritance and Travis's savings combined, they purchased a promising property in the Texas Hill Country, 200 acres with a year-round creek, good grazing land, and a small but solid house that Fiona immediately began to transform into a home. They started with a modest herd of 30 cattle, planning to expand gradually as they learned the rhythms of the land. The work was hard, harder than anything Fiona had known in Boston. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned beneath the Texas sun. There were moments of frustration, of exhaustion, of wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But there was also joy in the shared labor, in the tangible results of their efforts, in the knowledge that they were building something that belonged wholly to them. And there were the nights when they fell into bed together, sometimes too tired to do more than hold each other, sometimes with a passion that still took Fiona's breath away. Travis treated her body with the same reverence he'd shown when he'd pulled her from the collapsed mine, as if she were precious beyond measure. as if he could hardly believe his good fortune in being allowed to touch her. 6 months after their wedding, a letter arrived from Boston. Fiona recognized her father's handwriting and opened it with trembling fingers, Travis standing supportive at her shoulder. "My dearest daughter," her father had written, "I have spent many months considering the decision you made, trying to understand how my sensible, practical Fiona could choose such an unconventional path. I realize now that I failed to see how much you had grown, how capable you had become of making your own choices. Your mother would have understood immediately, I think. She always did see more clearly than I." The letter continued, expressing his desire to meet Travis and to see the life they were building together. He proposed a visit in the spring if they would have him. Fiona looked up at her husband, tears of relief and happiness blurring her vision. "He's coming to visit," she said. "He wants to know you." Travis pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Then we'll make sure he sees that his daughter is cherished beyond measure," he promised. A year to the day after the mine collapse that had brought them together, Fiona and Travis stood on the rise behind their house, watching the sunset paint the Texas hill country in shades of gold and crimson. Their herd had grown to 50 head. The house had acquired new furniture and curtains sewn by Fiona's increasingly capable hands, and a vegetable garden flourished behind a fence designed to keep out the local wildlife. "You ever regret it?" Travis asked softly, his arm around her waist. "Giving up Boston, your father's world, for all this?" Fiona considered the question seriously, as she always did when Travis asked it, which was less and less frequently as time passed and their life together solidified. "Never," she answered honestly. "This is where I belong. With you, building something that matters." She turned in his arms, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "Do you ever regret digging through that rubble with your bare hands for a woman you didn't even know?" Travis smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way Fiona had come to adore. "Best decision I ever made," he said, lowering his head to kiss her as the last rays of sun gilded their home, their land, their shared future stretching out before them like a promise kept. 10 years after the mine collapse, the young ranch had become one of the most successful in the county. Their innovative approach to cattle breeding, combining Travis's practical experience with Fiona's research and business acumen, had yielded a herd known for its hardiness and quality. The original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, 8-year-old Thomas, named for Travis's father, and 5-year-old Margaret, named for Fiona's mother. Fiona's father had indeed visited that first spring, and had returned every year since, eventually becoming a beloved grandfather who delighted in teaching his grandchildren about both Boston refinement and Texas adventure. He had finally admitted on his most recent visit that Fiona had made the right choice. "You've built something remarkable here," he'd told them as he prepared to return east. "Something with roots and purpose. I couldn't have wished anything better for you." As the sun set on the anniversary of their meeting, Travis and Fiona sat on the porch of their home, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Travis's hand found Fiona's, their fingers intertwining in the familiar gesture that had become a constant in their life together. 10 years, Travis mused. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I pulled you out of that mine. And sometimes it feels like I've always been here with you," Fiona replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "As if my life in Boston was just preparing me to find you." Travis lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe it's time we expanded again. Not the ranch, but—" He nodded toward their playing children. "Our family." Fiona smiled, a secret joy warming her from within. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said. In fact, I'm fairly certain that by next spring, Thomas and Margaret will have a new brother or sister." Travis turned to her, his expression one of wonder. "Truly?" Fiona nodded, laughing as Travis swept her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. "Truly. Our family is growing, just like everything else we've built together." As Travis set her gently back on her feet, his eyes shining with joy, Fiona thought again of that dark day in the mine. How what had seemed like disaster had led to this life of purpose and love, to this man who had dug through rubble with his bare hands to save a stranger and had continued, every day since, to show the same dedication to everything they created together. "I love you, Travis Young," she said simply. "More with each passing day." "And I love you, Fiona Young," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, "for all the days to come." In the gathering twilight, they called their children in for supper. Moving into the warm light of the home, they had built not just the physical structure, but the life within it. A life neither of them could have imagined before fate brought them together in the darkness of a collapsed mine, where a cowboy's determination and a woman's courage had laid the foundation for something enduring and true.